On this week's FarrCast, we are proud to welcome for the first time Admiral Terry McKnight, who discusses with Michael his work on anti-piracy and the state of readiness in the United States Navy. But first up, it's Jim Lebenthal on the markets, and then Dan Mahaffee shares his insights into the Trump Asia trip and Sino-U.S. relations. Now, here's your host, Michael Farr.
Welcome to the FarrCast. I am Michael Farr. Thanks so much for joining us again this week. It's the 30th day of October. Have 2 months left in this year of 2025. And boy, if these next two are as full as the first 10, wow. Keep your seatbelts fastened, okay? Keep your tray tables closed, right? And the bins overhead closed and your electric items off because it could continue to be bumpy. 30th, before I get started with what I'm seeing in Wall Street, Dad would be 100 years old today. So happy birthday, Dad. My dad passed away in August, and he had a wonderful, wonderful life. And like our guest this morning, Dad was a World War II Navy veteran. These two really weren't World War II, but both Navy veterans. We've got coming up for you today a great show. Starting out with Lebenthal, going to Mahaffee, and then a special treat. A seriously special treat. Admiral Terry McKnight's going to join us in our third segment. We're going to find out what's going on in that South China Sea, what's happening in the Middle East, what's happening with the state of the military, what his opinion is about the current state of the Pentagon, and what's going on over with Russia, which I think I'm going to start calling the Soviet Union again. But first to markets. Markets are still near all-time highs. The Federal Reserve cut, as expected yesterday, 1/4 point on interest rates. I immediately was on the air with CBS Market Watch Radio, and they said, what does this mean and why isn't the market reacting more? And the answer is, it means that the Fed is trying to get back to normal. It does not mean that the Fed is changing its stance to accommodative or to easing. They're not there to add fuel. They're there to take their foot off the brakes. They were restrictive and they're trying to get to neutral. This was expected, and it was so expected that markets really didn't react. It was a kind of a big ho-hum. So the focus now really is shifting to earnings. And we've had a lot of earnings. We had big tech earnings overnight. We had earnings from Eli Lilly. We had earnings across the board. And by and large, I got to talk to Lebenthal, they were pretty good. A couple of folks missed, but most of them have been pretty good. And some of them have been blowout. With all of the concerns about tariff pressures, how are we seeing some of these blowouts and what are we missing? Are we whistling past the graveyard because complacency is among the greatest risks to all investors? As you go across your dashboard every morning, as I'm telling you, every professional investor does, you take a look at that price of a barrel of oil, $60, $60.15, something like that. That doesn't show that there's a huge demand for oil. Gold, right at $4,000, but it stopped the big surge. The dollar is still pretty stable. It dropped back over the summer, but it has stabilized. Cryptocurrency has pulled back once again. It keeps bouncing around Bitcoin anyway, this $108,000, $109,000, $110,000 level. Up a lot, but still pulled back from those highs. So we're watching all of this, and as important, the big bellwether, the big barometer is the 10-year Treasury. It's gotten weaker. Which means the yield's gone up, and we're trading at about a 4.10 yield. We were down in the 390s just a couple of days ago. So yields on that 10-year are moving up, did not come down commensurately with the short end. The Fed lowered rates on the short end. All in all, things look okay. Very expensive, continuing to melt up and maybe even inflate to this bubble status. Jim Lebenthal is a partner at Cerity Partners, CNBC contributor. And as we always say, we listen to Lebenthal. Welcome back, Jim.
Michael, so good to be with you today. Thank you. That was a great introduction. Tell me which direction you want to go in.
I want to go into the direction of the markets. The markets weren't surprised by the Fed. What do you think about interest rates, and why did the 10-year Treasury fall based on that news?
Well, a couple of first off, the actual move down in the Fed funds rate by 25 basis points was the most expected cut I think I've ever seen.
Yes.
That was telegraphed, no surprise there. Also unsurprising is the shift to pretty much end quantitative tightening, which is accommodative to the markets overall. That was mostly expected as well. What was unexpected is a little bit more hawkish verbiage from the chairman, reflective of the committee about a December cut. And you know what? I think that's right. I think at where the Fed funds rate is right now, this range between 375 and 4.0 is probably an appropriate range to balance the dual mandates. We clearly see some cracks in the labor market. We should talk about that. But we also clearly see that inflation is stuck at 3%, and they're flying blind, or at least in the chairman's word, in a fog. So it's probably a good time to just kind of wait and see what happens. Now, before you respond to what I'm saying, you did mention the 10-year Treasury. Sure, it went down a little bit, but the 10-year Treasury yield at 4.08% gives me no reason for concern, and may just reflect the sort of diciness of whether we get a December cut. I'll tell you what's on my mind, though, is the equal weight S&P 500. This rally in the S&P 500 overall is becoming very concentrated once again. I mean, it's not just concentrated in artificial intelligence. It's concentrated in a few of the names, particularly NVIDIA, which seems to add $200 billion to its market cap seemingly every day. Now, that's everything I just said in the last 15 seconds is, a little unhealthy. Are we whistling past the graveyard? No, but we're whistling, and the graveyard is, on this side of the horizon, to use an expression that the admiral will understand all too well.
Yep. But if you look at some of those names, Apple came out with earnings. They were positive. Amazon had pretty decent earnings, and that stock's not moving. Google, or Alphabet, as we have to, well, I don't know why we keep having to have new names for these things. It's no longer Facebook. You've got to call it Meta. I find it very irritating. I have trouble keeping up with the original damn names, but that's maybe just me. Up 8.5% pre-market on Google this morning, and that was up after up 2.5% or more yesterday. Just a bunch of names across the board. Microsoft, though, called lower this morning. And we do have, as you said, NVIDIA was up 3% yesterday. We're up over $200 a share on NVIDIA. And these things seem to just want to grow to the sky, keep going up and up and up. What does that mean to you, Jim? And you said equal weight S&P 500. Equal weight S&P 500 isn't moving up as much as the S&P 500.
No, and it's a measure of the average stock. By virtue of it being equally weighted, it's the average of the 500 stocks in the S&P 500. So the average stock just isn't doing that well. What I do want to talk about, though, is you're talking about what does this mean for the markets overall and complacency. I think where we need to look and examine our complacency is in the economy, because there is clearly a shaky labor market, and a shaky labor market in one of the most important pillars, which is young college graduates. Yes. We have seen an incredible spike up in young college graduate unemployment. The newspapers are rife with articles about Amazon laying off workers, UPS laying off workers. And let's be clear, these are not UPS drivers. These are corporate jobs. These are not Amazon warehouse workers. These are Amazon office workers. There's something going on, and I hope it's temporary. We can lay the blame at the feet of artificial intelligence. We can lay it at the feet of trade policy uncertainty, but we better not be talking about this in 6 months. I really mean it, because that is going to be a problem if we don't get some strength in the labor market for young college graduates.
Last week, we talked about maybe problems in private debt.
Yes, we
were
did.
there concerns, and we've seen some banks who've been having some issues with private debt. And Jim points out a very important issue confronting the economy, and it's a crack in the labor market and the unemployment numbers. So if we have sort of this nascent, and maybe it's not that nascent, problem in the employment market, and we have a Federal Reserve that is peering through a glass dimly and really can't get a clean handle on the data. You said, we get 6 months from now. How will the Fed know what they're really looking at? And because they have two mandates, right? They've got price stability and they've got full employment, and they're not really sure what the employment is, and they're not really sure how much the prices are rising and falling. How does the Fed do its job? And did Jay Powell make it clear enough yesterday?
Well, he made it as clear as he could, given that he is, again, in his words, in a fog. The unfortunate thing is if the labor market worsens, that cures the inflation problem. And the inflation problem, as Chairman Powell pointed out, is most likely a one-time event due to tariffs. We'll see on that. I think there's a hidden question that you didn't quite ask, which is how are things going so well? How is the economy growing at 3.9%? How are people flying everywhere? And the simple answer is that stock market wealth is creating the ability for particularly the upper income cohorts to consume. Now, everybody on this call can't quite see what we're seeing, which is I've got the Admiral McKnight watching, so I'm standing up a little bit taller in my chair. My former naval officer instincts are coming out. This is a man who, as he watches, has spent decades in the service of this country. And what I'm saying is terribly crass in comparison. But it's the simple truth that stock market wealth and housing wealth, both of which are absent from the younger generation, both of which are absent from the lower income cohorts, are what is propping up this economy. So we better pat NVIDIA on the back and Google for that matter and everything else. But what we really ought to be looking out for is that the equal weight S&P 500 starts to catch up. It was doing okay. A couple of months ago, it was doing okay. But we can't have this equity market rally and all of the implications for consumption and the economy resting on NVIDIA. That's just too narrow.
And ladies and gentlemen, he's exactly right, of course. I think he always is, except when he disagrees with me, of course. But if I could encourage you to give young people a chance, I talked to a 36-year-old, very talented guy in a healthcare company over the past couple of days. And I asked him to talk to a recent college graduate from Davidson University, towards the top of his class, an athlete of this and that. And the guy said, "Yeah, Michael, I'll talk to him, but I'm not going to hire some kid out of college and wet nurse him around and try and take care of him and teach him this and that. I'm not going through that. I'm going to hire somebody else in the workforce." Hey. Somebody hired you. Somebody gave you a chance. There's some really bright, talented people out there who will surprise you. Please give them a chance. They need a chance. And by the way, our country and our economy needs you to bring them into the fold and to give them jobs and let them grow and let them contribute to our economy. It's absolutely necessary. Wait a minute, Jim, I see Admiral McKnight as we're discussing employing these young people waving at me over there. Admiral, please weigh in for us.
Yeah, as Jim can jump on also. I mean, Jim mentioned earlier when I was talking to him, conning $1 billion submarine at the age of 24 years old. Pick here. I mean, think about that. How and the power it makes you feel, and the responsibility that you learn leading people at a young age. So Jim talked about the poor labor market for recent graduates. I would say take a strong look at serving our country. You don't have to do 20, 30 years. Just do a couple years and you will be proud of what you've done. And it's just a great experience.
Jim?
Admiral, I completely agree. And as I was listening to you, I was thinking about a short duty stint that I did at the Bureau of Naval Personnel, and it exposed to me to more than just the submarine force by far, which I bring up in response to what you're saying to point out that you can do so many different things in the military. I mean, so many different things. And now you're making me think about a young man who I knew from the Bronx, who was going in a dead-end direction. And he came to me, this is after I got out, and I was kind of a big brother, little brother mentor. He came to me and said, "I'm going to join the Marines." He went to Parris Island, came out as a PFC, private first class, then got picked up as a commissioning program, got his second lieutenant bars. He's now a major. And the point, I'm using that example to illustrate what you're saying. The opportunities in the military are just unbelievable. And all you have to do is just raise your hand and say, I do.
Great points, Jim.
Terrific. Ladies and gentlemen, talk to your young people and tell them the U.S. military needs you, and what a great education and experience it offers. A lot of fabulous and productive lives have been built on those wonderful beginnings, including my dear dad's in World War II. He actually enlisted when he was 17 before he was drafted into the Navy. He wanted to join the Navy. I asked him, I said, why did you want to join the Navy at 17? He said, they got to sleep in sheets every night. Okay. Dad always had a reason. That was a good one. Jim, as you're managing money, and here's where I want to end here this morning, if we may. As you're managing money and you get the brand new $5 million account through your door that's all in cash today, tell me what you do with it, because I can see you starting to chew on your fingernails.
Chew my cud, as my dad used to say. I would suck in my cheek.
Yeah.
Listen, it's a simple answer. Dollar cost average, and do it over the course of the next few months. I don't like to go as long as 6 months, but 3 to 4 months. Break it up into chunks, put it to work on 1 month increments. I cannot tell you if the market has topped out or when the market tops out. And folks, nobody can. What we can tell you, and this is Michael and me speaking, is that over the long run, the markets go higher. It's a simple fact. You can look at a 10-year chart, a 100-year chart, whatever extension of the S&P 500 you want to look at. The markets go higher over time. And the one time that turns out not to be true, it won't matter, because we've been hit by the proverbial or literal asteroid. So get in, take your time. Dollar cost average is the way to do it.
Jim Lebenthal is a partner at Cerity Partners, a CNBC contributor. And what he said in that dollar cost average is, Michael, I have a discipline to get invested, and I'm not going to let how I feel change that discipline. That's what he said. That's what I would say too. And I would probably be in a full body sweat putting that $5 million to work over the next 3 or 4 months. It's that uncomfortable, and I would do it, and Jim will do it. And so take that away, take your emotions out, and make sure that you make those disciplined, rational, dispassionate decisions, and get some help and advice if you need it from some professional out there. Promise you'll be in good stead. Thank you, Jim. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be back with Dan Mahaffee. Talk about politics when we come back on the FarrCast. Please stay with us.
Thanks for being with us on Season 9 of the FarrCast. And now, political analyst Dan Mahaffee and your host, Michael Farr.
Welcome back to the FarrCast. Joining me now, as he does every week now in Season 9 of the FarrCast, Dan Mahaffee, president of the Dr. Scholl Foundation, scholar at the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress, our senior political analyst on the FarrCast. Welcome back, Dan.
Good morning, Michael. Good to be talking to you. Thank you.
Good to be talking to you this 30th day of October. The president is on Air Force One as we record this morning, heading back to the United States after a successful, he says, meeting with President Xi Jinping, and that they made some really good deals, which aren't really completely worked out yet. We'll learn about them later, but he's very encouraged. It was a great success and a triumph, and everything was wonderful. He also had some important meetings in South Korea. I thought there was also going to be a lot of talks, meeting with Kim Jong-un in North Korea. Didn't seem to happen. What do you make of this trip?
I think, look, you saw great successes in Japan and South Korea, really trying to stabilize two extremely important relationships there for security, intelligence. You think of all the military bases we have in Japan, the importance there for the Pacific, the troops we have stationed in South Korea, as you mentioned, to deter against that North Korean you talked about there. So look, you have that strategic importance of Japan and South Korea. as well as continuing efforts. They won't say this. These efforts began under the first administration, were continued under Biden, and that the Trump administration is continuing to try and bring Japan and South Korea closer together too. Look, their history is really difficult, but the more they work together, the less of the load we have to bear when it comes to deterring North Korea, China, and those. So look, very successful in Japan, very successful in South Korea. I would say the discussions with Xi Jinping, though, what interests me there is I think it's the first time you saw a leader in that region. It had been multiple days of flattery up until that. And then with the Chinese, it was a tone I found very interesting with Xi, where it's almost, I would say, Dear Donald, look at all this trouble you've caused. And here we are right back basically where we began. And the president, we know, look, no matter how this trip turned out, he would be saying it was the best trip to Asia. We know that from his own self-grading. But when it comes to China, let's be clear about what this is. It's largely a truce. It's not a deal. It doesn't have a lot of the frameworks on future, trade goals, none of the things that a traditional trade deal would have. This is really both sides saying all these things, be it their rare earth cutoffs, our cutoffs of microchips, a realization that we can't afford this on either side, at least the way the leaders were doing the tit for tat. As well as I think if you look at the shape of the global economy, no matter how much the US and China become rivals, I think economically we're like Sherlock and Moriarty. And if there is going to be a final clash, we'd both go off the falls together.
Dan, was this a typical Chinese sort of a meeting? Now, ladies and gentlemen, Dan has his master's degree from Georgetown University in security studies. He also studied at East Normal University in Shanghai, speaks Mandarin, is quite an expert in this area of the world, and particularly China. And he helps us interpret what sometimes these little small cultural nuances actually mean. They might seem small to us. They're not small at all to over 1 billion Chinese when heard through their ears and seen through their eyes. Dan, typical Chinese meeting, or what's changing? What are the implications, and what do you think if you're witnessing this as a Chinese citizen?
Well, from the Chinese perspective, I don't think they see much has changed, and they will then portray themselves as actually being protectors of a trading order and international commerce. As much as they tilt the board in their direction, mess with the rules, things like that, steal your IP. We've gone through that. The Chinese still want to portray themselves to the world as the ones who are keeping things stable, not throwing up tariff barriers. They'll say, look, Trump talks about the deal, but we're the ones still actually doing business. We're not the ones putting up barriers to doing business. I also think too, you see that the Chinese throughout this have been very consistent. We don't see that from the Trump administration. Sometimes it depends on how he's feeling about China. It also depends. Lutnick sees tariffs as a goal for the deficit and various industries. Bessent, on the other hand, will talk about the deficit and other things. There's no clear strategy behind this. On the Chinese, on the other hand, we've seen very consistent policies, and I think smart ones. One, they've went after a president's key constituency throughout this and their refusal to buy soybeans. So you go after the president's rural farmers, and look, we finally have a truce on that they will buy some soybeans. But this was their embargo on us that they're now releasing. And then they also went after the rare earths, knowing, again, they're not that rare, but they're the only ones who process these minerals. And we need them from everything from fighter jets and missiles to blenders and electric cars. So all of those pain points, they knew they had them, and they were very consistent on them throughout this entire back and forth, even though as it was unclear to the American citizens and some of our allies what the goal of these trading policies were.
First our soybeans and then our blenders. The horror Oh, the horror. Uh, yeah, just being silly. Ladies and gentlemen, of course, uh, there are real consequences here. I think, Dan, the thing that you said that struck me most um, is that they're following a playbook in a disciplined way. Is the U.S. agenda advancing in this trade war, in this, because President Biden was very tough on China as well. People don't talk about it. He was very tough on China. He advanced the restrictions, trade restrictions, if not necessarily tariffs on China put in place by the Trump administration. So the U.S. is advancing a policy, correct me if I'm wrong, that is much tougher on China, trying to hold China more accountable for a lot of the intellectual property theft, etc., in their seeming battle that they've picked with us. Are we still advancing in that cause to further U.S. interests or not? You're talking about sort of a truce. It doesn't sound like we're winning anything, and maybe they are.
Well, again, this is which part of the U.S. interests vis-a-vis China are you getting at? Look, the current administration and President Trump, rightly or wrongly, is very focused on the trade deficit, and he has made a lot of things negotiable en route to his goal of reducing the U.S.-China trade deficit. When you look back at his remarks, that is his biggest thing vis-a-vis the U.S. and China. It's not Taiwan. It's not semiconductors. When it comes to semiconductors, he's telling every company, just move your factory to the US. That's the solution. So when it comes to the president and China, it's the art of this deal, and what's on the table of the deal becomes the question. Back in the Biden administration, a lot of this stuff was, how do you have two tracks? One, steel, soybeans, things like that. They're not as strategic as microchips and semiconductors. So you had, under the previous administration, a lot of the stuff that we said was national security, that's not negotiable. Chips, advanced semiconductors, that all sits in a secure category, but let's do business in the other one. In this administration, there's no longer that distinction. Everything is negotiable. And I think as we see this ending, look, we've said we're not going to have those same semiconductor restrictions. We're pulling back national security restrictions on semiconductors we once considered non-negotiable, but also I would say everyone is breathing some sigh of relief that at least publicly, Taiwan wasn't on the negotiating table during this discussion as well.
Yeah. Are we winning or losing with China, Dan?
Still a draw.
Yeah, I hate that, but okay. I suppose it beats losing.
Because Michael, as I said, my analysis, it's the Sherlock and Moriarty scenario.
What does that mean?
At the end of those great books, when they're grappling together in their final showdown, they both tumble off the falls in Switzerland together.
There you go. Not exactly a win for either side. All right, Dan, talk about the shutdown. It doesn't seem to be making any progress whatsoever. And now the SNAP benefits are gone. I've got 2 seconds on this. Get me through this one quickly.
Yeah, Michael, on that one, I think we don't see anything change because right now it's everyone is seeing this and reading it as it's hurting the other guy, not me.
Yeah. See, and that's the political answer in Washington, D.C. It's hurting the Republicans. It's not hurting me. It's hurting the Democrats. It's not hurting me. It's hurting the people who aren't getting the damn benefits is who it's hurting. Okay? It's hurting people who aren't getting their paychecks. Air traffic controllers, if you're in a plane next to that pilot, the person you're praying for hardest is that air traffic controller. Particularly the ones negotiating around New York City and Washington, D.C., and Boston and Atlanta, etc., Charlotte, Dallas, San Francisco, Los Angeles. These folks aren't getting paid.
And look, the solution, of course, is there. One, you can change the Senate threshold to 50 votes, but that does open, again, party line budgets for the future. You have that. And two, look, for Republicans right now, it helps cover because if it was up to them how to do their own budget, there would be a lot of internal disagreement that is right now papered over on just blaming the Democrats.
There was another round of fire in Israel. It was in Palestine by Israel saying that Hamas was violating the agreement. Still happening, stopped. What's going on there? And I mean 2 seconds on
Yeah,
this,
look,
please.
got to fix the hostage remains process for the ceasefire to work. They've got to get those dead bodies back, and that's been a sticking point. But right now, the Netanyahu government, any kind of violation, they have to respond strongly for him to keep his political coalition together. That hasn't changed. And as we said last week, it's all about who is going over, be it Vance, Rubio, etc., to BB sit, as we call it.
To BB said, okay, so if everything goes smoothly over there, how long does Netanyahu stay in office? If everything goes smoothly and they don't have anything to shoot anybody else over, empiric or not, how long?
At this point, I'd have to double check the calendar of when he actually has to call elections because he's going to try and run out that clock as long as he can.
President imposed tariffs on Canada because they ran an ad showing Ronald Reagan saying tariffs were a bad idea.
Yes.
If tariffs are being used as an emergency power by the president, what emergency was created by this?
That's a good question, and I think one that will be asked before the courts when these tariffs go before the Supreme Court. These are powers used for national economic emergency, national security. Though that's why the president can do tariffs without Congress. Those are the reasons. Otherwise, the Constitution says Article 1, tariffs are Congress's job, and it's not good to go before the court saying the national emergency was that the Canadians ticked me off.
George Will is talking in his column today about the ballroom being built at the White House, and essentially the theme of this article is Donald Trump is still the most powerful president we may have ever seen, who's able to act unilaterally without deference or seemingly a whit of caring about any contrary voice or word. And say whatever you want. He's going to do whatever he wants. That's Will is not a favorite, doesn't favor the new ballroom, but he talks more about the process as you read through that article. When you think about what happened in Canada, is the president's power eroding anywhere, or is it just continuing to grow?
I think it's growing and consolidating, but if we look at presidential history, the most drastic scandals have tended to come at moments of greatest power. You look at Iran-Contra, Watergate, the worst things that of presidential overreach. So you hope for the president's sake that someone is advising him on what hubris and power have done to past presidents. But look, this ballroom maneuver, we've talked about it last week. You agree with it or not? I think the optics don't work well in a country where, more and more folks are banging the last two nickels together to make ends meet, and you're seeing a gilded structure go up in Washington. Look, we can talk about the need for the space, other things which we have. I think the political perception of it at a time of his most powerful moments doesn't work. But in George Will's piece where he encourages people to be more worried about the Constitution rather than the ballroom. I would look at that. I would look at what also Michael Ludwig, a big conservative judge, wrote in The Atlantic this week about President Trump being on the pathway to being a king. There are conservative scholars who are very worried about what the president is doing constitutionally right now. But politically, we've never seen anyone as powerful. I think even the only thing he's shown limitations on is when he admitted himself on the way back from Asia or during one of the stints that as much as he'd like to, the Constitution keeps him from running for a third term.
Dan Mahaffee is president of the Dr. Scholl Foundation, scholar, and board member at the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress. Thank you, Dan, very, very much. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to come right back with Admiral Terry McKnight. Just wait, folks. You're in for a treat. Please stay with us.
Thank you for joining us on the FarrCast. And now, back to your host, Michael Farr.
Welcome back to the FarrCast. Joining me now, a great treat and a first-time FarrCast guest, and I really hope we're going to be able to get him back, and I promise he's going to be a favorite of yours, ladies and gentlemen. Admiral Terrence McKnight, Terry McKnight, is a friend of mine, which is a great honor and privilege for me to say that. Rear Admiral McKnight went to VMI. He served our country from 1978 through 2009. He was in charge of the counter-piracy fleet and effort in the Gulf of Aden. He has served really around the world and domestically, a surface warfare officer. His list of stars and medals and everything else, a Bronze Star, a Legion of Merit, it goes on and on. And I can tell you that he is one of those, it wouldn't just be lip service to say it would embarrass him if I read the whole list. It would. He's that kind of guy. He doesn't want me to do that, and so I'm not. But Admiral, welcome to the FarrCast. We're so glad you're with us.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you for having me. This is really great stuff, and boy, is there a lot going on in the world today, as you just had your two last speakers talk.
When you look at the newspapers every morning, Admiral, and listen to the news, what are you watching first around the world? I mean, I'm checking, as you know, the price of oil and the price of gold and where futures are opening and earnings overnight and what's happening out of the Federal Reserve. Those are probably not the same headlines you turn to first.
It's funny. The last couple of weeks, maybe the last couple of months, a lot of people have come to me and say, "What are your concerns or thoughts on attacking these drug vessels, narco terrorists, as we call them, in the Caribbean and now in the Pacific?" And it's a great question because, when I was out doing the counter piracy thing, we could have eliminated the pirates, just going out there and taking them out. But we couldn't do that. We didn't have the rules of engagement to do that. So things have changed now. We've decided that bringing drugs into the country is a national emergency. And so we're just going to take them out, whether we know they have drugs or not, or where they're from. We say we have intel, but I have not seen it. I'm not read into those programs to have the intel. So it's kind of interesting. We all want to see the elimination of the drugs coming into the country, but is this the right way to do it? Spending $10,000 weapon systems to make sure we obliviate whoever's in those crafts. And the Coast Guard has been doing this for many years, going after these drug traffickers, but they have not taken them out like we are doing now.
So you talked about the rules of engagement. You were restricted when you were in the Gulf of Aden and you were in charge of counter-piracy. What are those restrictions? What are the rules of engagement? What were you able to do and not able to do then? And then let's talk about if you were taking a look at what was going on with these piracy ships and drug ships that are being, I guess, engaged now and blown up. I mean,
right.
Explain the difference.
Yeah. So back then, basically the rules of engagement, if the pirates, shot at us or, anything like that, we had we could, basically take them out then. But their piracy rules of engagement were kind of interesting. They didn't want to take out because they knew what would happen. We basically were allowed to, apprehend them and then send them off to trial, which we did, in several occasions. Today, it's basically don't ask any questions, just take them out. So I'd say it's a far, we've gone from maybe the 20-yard line out, now we're crossing the goal line where we're just saying, hey, we're not going to try them. We're not going to do anything with them. We don't care what drugs they're carrying. We're just going to eliminate them right there in the water. So it's a massive step forward in where we were.
Admiral, when you were in command and you were abiding and obeying those rules of engagement, did the bad guys also stick to some sort of rule structure? And I'm, of course, going to that notion of if we stop actually, honoring those rules of engagement and just saying we're just going to take them out, do the other people around the world behave worse? Do our enemies then all of a sudden say, okay, there are no rules, we're going to do whatever we want? Or is it a problem? Tell me, is this going to cause us greater problems in the future? I guess what I'm asking.
That's hard to say, Michael. But when I was out there, the Russians had they apprehended some pirates, brought them on board one of their ships, and then put them back in their craft several hundred miles off the coast of Somalia, and then they disappeared. Now the Russians contended that they got lost and just went to sea, but that there were several holes in the bottom of their boats, and they didn't make it all the way back to Somalia. So a lot of people ask for the rule of law. We've been chasing pirates. It's one of our country's navy started on that our 250th anniversary. You go back and look at where the birth of we were chasing pirates back then. So we've been doing this a long time, and we have we've taken out people in the past, but in the 21st century here, now we've taken a great leap forward on these narco terrorists and said, hey, we're just not going to deal with them. We're not going to take them to trial or anything like that. We're just going to completely obliviate. What the rest of the world will say is, okay, maybe tat for tat. You decide to do that, then we can also do that. So it's a balancing game that we have to take a look at.
The president is very much engaged with our military. Secretary Hegseth has taken a bit of a new approach to being the Secretary of Defense that we've not seen others take in the same way. How would you characterize the new Defense Department, and what would it be like to be a flag officer in this Pentagon?
Well, one thing, he got all the flag and general officers together, and you can search, good luck, and find out any comments, that any flag or general officer on active duty, said about the conference. Years ago, you'd hear comments, and say, okay, it was good or bad. But now, basically, the communications door is shut. Secretary of War Hegseth, basically, I would say, disestablished the public affairs staff, reporters in Pentagon. He made them sign a memo, and a lot of them, Fox News, Wall Street Journal, a lot of long list of well-established publications, said we're not going to sign that. So he's restricted. I'm not going to say he restricted the freedom of the press, but we're just not getting the whole story. I was a little upset. He went out to the Pacific, and the word was that he failed to acknowledge the soldiers, sailors, and airmen, whoever out there that had beards, whether it's for a medical reason. It's a different environment now. The next war there's going to be there's tremendous AI. We talk about weapon systems and things like that. So we're going to need some very smart people who have beards and long hair to help us out in the next conflict.
Yeah, those guys who understand so much about these computer systems and
right.
AI, then perhaps our particular cohort does at this point.
Sure.
I always in search of a teenager to help me with my iPhone, and just feel stupid. So, Admiral, can take me over to the South China Sea, if you would, please. The Chinese are ramping up their presence. Our ships and our planes and our troops are in closer and closer contact around Taiwan. We have these newly built and created Chinese islands that are being established as new territories as the reach is expanded. What's at risk? What's the danger? Is that the area of the world that's keeping you awake at night? Tell us how you see this playing out.
Well, it's as Dan, the last speaker, said, Taiwan is the focus of China. I mean, in our lifetime, something's going to happen, whether it's a complete embargo around Taiwan without, any lives being lost, or an invasion. I don't know the answer to that, and we've got to watch, from either angle. Our forces are pretty much now focused on that area, the South China Sea. Our naval forces, we are probably, I would say, 60-40 now in the Pacific, rather than the Atlantic area. We used to have a constant present in the Mediterranean and in the Middle East. Now those are all not there anymore, and we've moved a lot of the forces towards towards the South Pacific. So it's a big area, and the big issue is, as you've mentioned, is China is going to overwhelm us with numbers, whether it's the numbers of missiles, cyber attacks, or number of ships. And it's at the rate that we're building ships and submarines and airplanes right now, we are lagging behind.
Admiral, I'm going to ask perhaps perhaps an unfair question, but that never stopped me before. If I were to make you, as I think would be in a great interest of our country, chairman of the Joint Chiefs today, call you back into service, you're chairman of the Joint Chiefs, what conversation would you have with the president, and what would your top couple of items be on your agenda as chairman of the Joint Chiefs?
Well, wearing my Navy hat, shipbuilding is a big issue. I mean, we you go back 100 years and look at the what happened before World War II. It's going to be a contested naval battle if we get into a shooting war with China or anybody else. So shipbuilding is a big issue. It's taken us a long time to build ships right now. Our defense budgets, I'd say to the president, sir, our defense budgets are not reflecting the requirements. We have almost $1 trillion now, but things are more expensive, and we're not building enough of them, and not building fast enough. Now, does it mean we need to build more aircraft carriers? Of course, but we also need to look at other means. You take a look at what's happening in Ukraine, with the drones. I mean, I don't think anybody, if we would have sat here 6 years ago and said that that 1,000 drones would be flying around the areas of Ukraine every day, we would not say that's probably not going to happen, but it's happening, and that's the new area of warfare. Cheaper weapons that they can throw lots of them out and just make it a complex military situation where we have to figure it out.
The same thing happening underwater. I mean, we certainly have underwater drones. Does the expansion of the submersible drone fleet make sense to you? Is that where you would commit greater resources?
Absolutely, in both areas. Whether it's below the surface or above the surface. A submarine takes years and years to build now, and you could take a smaller vessel, and I would say expendable. Our submarines are not expendable. We don't want to lose a submarine, but if we lose a couple underwater drones, going after an objective area, then so be it. We'll just write it off.
Okay. And what advice would you give the president, please, as chairman of the Joint Chiefs?
I would say support the military. And I think the president is very behind the military. I would say make sure that our budgets, support the requirements that we need, and also, the big issue is, just take a look at like we've talked about, some of where we're sending our resources. We have a lot of forces right now in the Caribbean, and and we've got other areas that we probably can use it. So we need to build up the Coast Guard, because that realistic is a Coast Guard mission. Their national security, that's ours. Ours is too, but not on scale. I mean, I think having 2,000 Marines in the Caribbean is not the best use of forces.
Final question. As you think about your greatest concern around the world for the United States, for our military, what's the one area that has you most concerned? I don't want to push you to say the word worry, but what's your greatest concern?
Well, of course, the greatest concern is the South Pacific and Taiwan. If we have to get into a conflict there, hopefully that never happens. It's not going to be a chasing pirates in the Caribbean. This is going to be a major conflict. We have not had a major conflict on the surface since World War II. So the Chinese are building ships faster than we can, even keep count of them. So it's going to be a tough situation for us. So,
Admiral Terry McKnight, thank you so much for being with us on the FarrCast. As always, I've learned so much. And thanks, too, for your friendship. He's a great golf partner, ladies and gentlemen. We've won money on the golf course, just so you know. Not that I'm bragging. I'm just telling you I'll ride his coattails anywhere. That's it for another FarrCast as we cover Wall Street, Washington, and the world. bringing you insiders so that we better understand that world and how it's going to affect our economy, how it's going to affect what you need to do as you think about investing and understanding this very complex life and the times in which we find ourselves. 30th day of October. Happy birthday, Dad. We'll be back 100 years, 100th birthday today. We'll be back again next week to do it all again. For my producer, Harry Jennings, everybody at Hightower and Farr Miller and Washington, thank you so much for listening in Washington, D.C. I'm Michael Farr.
That's a wrap for this week's episode of the FarrCast. Thanks to this week's guests, Jim Lebenthal, Dan Mahaffee, and special guest, Admiral Terry McKnight. And thanks to you, our listeners. We hope you enjoy the show as much as we enjoy making it for you. FarrCast is produced by Michael Farr and Harry Jennings and comes to you weekly for free on all major podcast platforms, including TuneIn, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Please be aware that anytime we or any of our guests mention a specific company, sector, or refer to performance in relation to an earnings report, news headline, or economic trend, it is not a recommendation to buy or sell. Review the risks and rewards of any investment with your financial advisor for what specific investment and general strategy is appropriate for you before you make any investment decision. And if we can be of assistance here at Farr Miller in Washington, please reach out to me at hjennings@farrmiller.com. We are here to help, and I'll be happy to put you in touch with one of our investment professionals to help you navigate your financial course across the changing investing landscape. We are grateful for all of your notes and comments, and we try to respond to as many as we can. Please keep those emails and messages coming. We'll be back with you next week with more guests from across Wall Street, Washington, and the world. Until next time, take care, stay safe, and stay healthy. And thank you for listening to the FarrCast. Farr Miller in Washington is a group comprised of investment professionals registered with Hightower Advisors, LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor. Some investment professionals may also be registered with Hightower Securities, LLC, member FINRA and SIPC. Advisory services are offered through Hightower Advisors, LLC. Securities are offered through Hightower Securities, LLC. All information referenced herein is from sources believed to be reliable. Farr Miller in Washington and Hightower Advisors, LLC have not independently verified the accuracy or completeness of the information contained in this podcast. Farr Miller in Washington and Hightower Advisors, LLC and any of its affiliates make no representations or warranties, expressed or implied, as to the accuracy or completeness of the information or for statements or errors or omissions or results obtained from the use of this information. Farr Miller in Washington and Hightower Advisors, LLC and any of its affiliates assume no liability for any action made or taken in reliance on or relating in any way to the information. This podcast and the materials contained herein were created for informational purposes only. The opinions expressed are solely those of the authors and do not represent those of Hightower Advisors, LLC or any of its affiliates. Farr Miller in Washington and Hightower Advisors, LLC or any of its affiliates do not provide tax or legal advice. This material was not intended or written to be used or presented in any way to any entity as tax or legal advice. Clients are urged to consult their tax and or legal advisors for related questions.